What if I told you that in one of the greatest cities of the ancient world, every woman, at least once in her life, was expected to perform a ritual that modern historians still argue about in whispers? A ritual so controversial that later empires tried to erase it from history. A ritual described by a Greek historian as sacred, condemned by later writers as shameful, and debated today as one of the biggest historical mysteries of the ancient world. Welcome to Babylon, a city of golden temples, towering walls, hanging gardens, and laws carved into stone thousands of years before Rome even existed. But hidden behind the grandeur of its ziggurats and markets was a temple ritual connected to the goddess Ishtar, the goddess of love, fertility, war, and divine sexuality. According to ancient accounts, women of Babylon once sat inside her temple, waiting for a stranger, not for romance, not for pleasure, but for religion, for duty, for the gods. And what happened next is something many historians believe was later deliberately misunderstood, exaggerated, or erased. Tonight, we uncover the sacred ritual Babylon didn't want remembered. Babylon was not a myth. It was one of the most powerful cities on Earth, around 1800 to 500 BCE, located in modern-day Iraq, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. It was a city of laws, mathematics, astronomy, and engineering so advanced that even the Greeks were stunned by it. The Hanging Gardens, the Code of Hammurabi, the giant blue Ishtar gate. But above all of this stood the Temple of Ishtar. To understand the ritual, you must first understand Ishtar. She was not simply a goddess of love, she was also a goddess of war, power, fertility, and cosmic balance. She represented the life force itself, birth, desire, death, and renewal. To the Babylonians, sexuality was not sinful. It was sacred energy, divine power, gift from the gods that sustained the world. And this belief shaped one of the most mysterious temple practices in ancient history. Our main source for this ritual comes from a Greek historian named Herodotus. Writing around 450 BCE, he described a custom that stunned later readers. Every Babylonian woman, once in her life, had to sit in the temple of Ishtar and have intercourse with a stranger as an offering to the goddess. According to him, women would sit in the temple courtyard. Men would walk by and toss a coin into their lap, invoking the goddess' name. The woman could not refuse. After the act, she was considered blessed and free to return home. To Greek readers, this sounded outrageous. To later Christian writers, it sounded sinful. To modern historians, it sounds suspicious. Was Herodotus telling the truth? Did he misunderstand what he saw? Or was this ritual something far more symbolic than later generations imagined? Because archaeological evidence tells a much more complicated story. In Mesopotamian religion, temple priestesses known as Nadru and Kadistu served Ishtar. These women were not prostitutes in the modern sense. Many were wealthy, respected, and lived independently inside temple complexes. Some texts describe them as celibate. Others describe them as participating in fertility rites. This contradiction is where the mystery begins. Clay tablets from Babylon never clearly describe this ritual in the way Herodotus does. Instead, they describe sacred marriages, symbolic unions between the king and a priestess, representing the goddess, meant to ensure fertility for the land. So where did the idea of every woman come from? Some scholars believe Herodotus saw temple rituals and misunderstood their meaning through a Greek cultural lens. Others believe later moralistic societies deliberately exaggerated the story to portray Babylon as decadent and immoral. And some believe the ritual really did exist, but not in the crude way it was later described. Imagine the temple complex. Its tall walls covered in blue glazed bricks, lions carved into the gates, incense burning in the air, priests chanting hymns in Sumerian. Women gathered inside, dressed in linen, waiting patiently, not nervously, not shamefully, but with the belief that they were participating in something sacred and honorable. If the ritual happened, it would not have been seen as degrading. It would have been seen as divine service, a way to receive the goddess's blessing for marriage, fertility, and prosperity. In Babylonian culture, shame around sexuality did not exist in the way later cultures imposed it. Desire was holy, fertility was power. Women were seen as vessels of divine life force. This is why the story is so difficult for modern minds to interpret. When Persian, Greek, and later Christian cultures dominated the region, Babylon became a symbol of corruption and decadence in their writings. In the Bible, Babylon is described as the great harlot. This language was not accidental. Painting Babylon as sexually immoral helped justify conquering it and dismissing its culture. Over centuries, the story of the ritual transformed from sacred rite to scandalous rumor. It's a historical fact repeated without context. By the Middle Ages, the idea of temple prostitution in Babylon was accepted as truth, even though no Babylonian text clearly confirms it. Today, historians are divided into three camps. 1. It truly happened as Herodotus described. 2. It was a misunderstood fertility ritual involving priestesses only. 3. It never happened, and was a cultural misunderstanding exaggerated over time. What is certain is this: Babylon had a radically different view of sexuality, religion, and women's roles than later societies. And that difference made later historians uncomfortable. So uncomfortable that the story was either sensationalized or buried. Whether the ritual happened exactly as described is almost secondary. The real mystery is why this story survived for 2,500 years. Why was it repeated by Greeks, Romans, Christians, and modern writers? Why did Babylon's image become tied to sexual excess in the historical imagination? Because sometimes what history chooses to remember tells us more than what actually happened. And Babylon's sacred ritual may be one of the greatest examples of history being rewritten by cultural bias. Long before Greek travelers wrote sensational stories about Babylon, the temples of Ishtar were already some of the most powerful institutions in ancient Mesopotamia. At the heart of these temples lived women whose roles have puzzled historians for centuries. They don't fit neatly into any modern category like nun, priestess, or servant. Instead, they represent something far more complex: religious officials, economic managers, and symbols of divine power, all at once. Their titles, Nadru and Tu, and Kadistu, appear again and again on clay tablets that survived for thousands of years beneath the dust of Iraq. These aren't scandalous diaries. They're legal documents. They record land ownership, trade agreements, and inheritances, showing that these women were often wealthy, literate, and socially respected. Many came from elite families who dedicated their daughters to temple service not as a punishment, but as a position of great honor. It linked their household directly to the goddess Ishtar herself. Unlike later religious traditions that demanded strict separation from society, many of these women were savvy business operators. They owned property, lent money with interest, managed farms, and even employed their own staff. This made the temple not just a place of worship, but a powerful economic hub. Run in part by female administrators whose authority came directly from Ishtar's name. This was a world where spirituality and commerce went hand in hand. But within this respectable system, there were rituals that outsiders struggled to understand. These rites were connected to fertility, renewal, and cosmic balance. You see, Mesopotamian religion didn't divide the sacred and the physical the way later cultures did. The body was seen as a vessel of divine energy, and sexuality was part of the life force that kept the universe in harmony. This is why the concept of a sacred marriage, known in later Greek texts as hieros gamos, appears so often. In this ritual, the king would symbolically unite with a high priestess who represented the goddess. This wasn't a private act. It was a public religious theater meant to ensure prosperity for the land. It was a grand ceremony filled with music, offerings, and chanting, affirming the bond between heaven and earth, the ruler and the deity. So where did the sensational stories come from? Many scholars believe that the Greek historian Herodotus may have heard stories of such ceremonies, or perhaps witnessed echoes of them, without understanding their symbolic nature. He interpreted these complex rituals through his own Greek moral framework, transforming symbolic theater into a literal and shocking description. Because nowhere in Babylonian legal or religious records is there any instruction saying every woman must do what he claimed. What we do find are references to women visiting the temple, making offerings, and participating in rites for blessings before marriage. We know they spent time in the sacred courtyards during festivals dedicated to Ishtar festivals that celebrated love, and renewal with processions and communal gatherings, blurring the line between daily life and divine celebration. Imagine these crowded temple spaces, filled with incense smoke and chanting priests. The presence of women sitting, waiting, praying, or performing their duties could easily have been misinterpreted by a foreign observer who didn't know the language or the symbolism. This misunderstanding is amplified when you look at Mesopotamian myths, which openly spoke of gods and goddesses engaging in love and desire. These weren't soap operas. They were powerful metaphors for agricultural cycles and human survival. But to later Greek and Christian writers, these themes were often viewed with discomfort and moral suspicion. The confusion is even clearer when we look at the language. The term kadistu, which older scholarship often translated as sacred prostitute, more accurately means holy woman or consecrated one. There's no explicit sexual meaning in the original Akkadian language. This suggests that earlier translators may have projected their own assumptions onto ancient words they didn't fully grasp. As modern archaeologists uncovered more and more of these clay tablets in the 19th and 20th centuries, a much clearer picture began to emerge. It showed a world of temple women who were respected, economically independent, and ritually significant, but who were not part of any organized system resembling prostitution, sacred or otherwise. This forces us to reconsider the famous story. Was it a massive exaggeration, a profound misunderstanding, or perhaps a rare local custom that storytellers blew up into a citywide law? Even if the literal version is doubtful, a deeper truth remains. Babylonian religion embraced aspects of human life that later societies tried to wall off from spirituality. This very openness is what made Babylon appear so shocking to outsiders who preferred to draw strict moral lines between the sacred and the profane. And so, over time, the image of Babylon's temple women was twisted. They went from being respected religious figures to symbols of decadence in foreign writings. It's a transformation that tells us far more about the biases of the storytellers than about the women themselves. These women walked the temple courtyards in linen robes. They managed financial records, led prayers to Ishtar, and participated in ceremonies meant to ensure the survival of their entire civilization. Their true stories are preserved not in scandalous tales, but in mundane contracts written on clay contracts about grain, silver, and land that quietly testify to the reality of their lives. As we read these tablets today, we see that the real mystery isn't whether a sensational ritual happened exactly as described. The mystery is how easily a complex and sophisticated religious culture was flattened into a single, shocking tale, a tale that overshadowed the true and vital significance of the women who served the goddess at the very center of Babylonian life. Thank you so much for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as I did, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more historical deep dives. See you next time. If there was any moment in the Babylonian year when the boundary between ordinary life and divine presence seemed to dissolve, it was during the great religious festivals dedicated to Ishtar, when the city itself transformed into a living temple and thousands of people flooded the sacred streets in celebration of fertility, renewal, and cosmic harmony. And it is within the atmosphere of these festivals that many historians believe the roots of the controversial story may be found. Because these were not quiet ceremonies hidden behind stone walls, but loud, public, communal events where music, incense, offerings, dance, prayer, and symbolic reenactments filled the air from sunrise to nightfall, creating scenes that would have appeared overwhelming, mysterious, and easily misinterpreted to any foreign visitor unfamiliar with the deeper meaning behind what they were witnessing. An ancient texts describe how statues of the gods were carried in grand processions through Babylon's gates, how priests and priestesses sang hymns in ancient Sumerian, how citizens dressed in special garments, and how the temple courtyards became gathering places for ritual participation rather than private worship. Because Mesopotamian religion was not built around silent devotion, but around collective experience where the entire community played a role in sustaining the favor of the gods. And during these festivals, women in particular took on visible religious roles, bringing offerings, sitting in designated areas of the temple, praying for blessings related to marriage, childbirth, health, and prosperity, sometimes remaining for extended periods as part of ritual observance that symbolized devotion to Ishtar. And it is not difficult to imagine how such scenes rose of women seated within temple grounds, strangers approaching with offerings, priests moving between them, coins and gifts being exchanged in the name of the goddess, could be misunderstood by an outsider like Herodotus, who lacked both the language and the symbolic framework to interpret what he saw correctly, especially when the Babylonian concept of offering was not limited to food or animals, but included acts, gestures, and vows made before the deity, some of which may have been deeply symbolic rather than literal. We must remember that Herodotus never read Babylonian tablets, never spoke Akkadian, and relied heavily on translators and local informants whose explanations may have been simplified or distorted to satisfy a curious foreigner. And when he returned to Greece with stories of Babylon, his audience was primed to view Eastern cultures as exotic and morally strange, making his account more compelling as a tale of foreign oddity than as careful ethnography. Yet what makes this situation even more complex is that Babylonian myths about Ishtar were openly sensual in metaphor, describing the goddess as a figure of desire, love, and fertility, whose union with gods or kings symbolized the renewal of the earth. Stories that were recited during festivals and acted out in symbolic performances that blurred the line between myth and ritual. And if a visitor heard these myths being sung while watching real women participate in temple rites, the conclusion might seem obvious even if it was wrong, because in a culture where sacred drama represented cosmic truths, the reenactment of divine union did not necessarily imply literal behavior among participants, but rather a shared symbolic language understood by locals and opaque to foreigners, wherein archaeological evidence from Babylon's temple districts shows large courtyards designed for gatherings, benches built along the walls, storage rooms for offerings, in administrative areas where temple workers managed donations and ritual schedules, all pointing to a highly organized religious system built to accommodate crowds during major events, not secretive activities hidden from public view. And clay tablets recovered from these sites list food distributions, priestly duties, musical performances, and offerings made by families during festivals, yet never describe the scandalous practice later attributed to them, which suggests that if any ritual involving intimacy existed, it was either extremely rare, symbolic, or confined to specific ceremonial roles that later writers generalized into a universal rule. And as modern historians piece together this evidence, a picture emerges of a city whose religious life was vibrant, communal, and deeply tied to ideas of fertility and cosmic balance, but not necessarily reflective of the sensational story passed down through Greek and Roman texts. And perhaps the most telling detail is how Babylonian society itself viewed women who served in the temple during these festivals not as disgraced figures, but as participants in sacred duty, returning afterward to marriages, families, and respected lives, which contradicts the idea of a shameful or exploitative practice and instead suggests a ritual framework that made sense within their worldview, even if it confuses ours. And so when we imagine the festival of Ishtar, we should picture not scandal, but spectacle, drums echoing through stone corridors, incense rising toward the sky, priests chanting ancient hymns, women seated in prayerful devotion, and a city united in the belief that through ritual, the gods could be persuaded to bless their land with life, abundance, and protection. A scene so foreign to later observers that it became easier to reduce it to a shocking story than to try to understand the complex religious imagination behind it. Have you ever wondered what ancient Babylon, the city of legends, was really like? For centuries, our main source was a Greek traveler named Herodotus, often called the father of history. Around 450 BC, he journeyed through the Persian Empire and left us a vivid, almost fantastical description of Babylon. But here's the twist. How much of what he wrote was fact, and how much was a mix of hearsay, exaggeration, and myth? Today, we're going to unravel the mysteries of Herodotus's Babylon and separate the historical reality from the enduring legends he helped create. Let's start with what Herodotus saw, or at least what he told us he saw. He described Babylon as a city of immense scale, a perfect square with sides nearly 14 miles long, surrounded by a massive wall so wide that a four-horse chariot could do a U-turn on top. He spoke of a deep, wide moat filled with water and 100 bronze gates gleaming in the sun. Inside, the city was supposedly laid out in a grid with straight streets, a feature quite advanced for its time. At its heart stood the magnificent ziggurat, a towering temple dedicated to the god Marduk, which many believe was the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel. Herodotus's descriptions are breathtaking. He painted a picture of a metropolis so grand it almost defies belief. He talked about houses 3 or 4 stories high and a bridge spanning the mighty Euphrates River, which cut through the city. His account was so detailed and confident that for over 2,000 years it was taken as gospel. European scholars and explorers used his writings as a blueprint, dreaming of uncovering this perfectly square, colossal city in the Mesopotamian desert. The problem started when modern archaeology began in the 19th and 20th centuries. Archaeologists like Robert Koldewey flocked to Iraq, spades in hand, ready to prove Herodotus right. They dug, and they did find Babylon. They unearthed the Ishtar Gate, a stunningly beautiful structure covered in blue glazed bricks and depictions of dragons and bulls. They found the foundations of a massive ziggurat and the sprawling palace complex of King Nebuchadnezzar II. It was without a doubt a magnificent city, but it wasn't Herodotus's city. The archaeological evidence painted a very different picture. The city's outer walls, while impressive, enclosed an area far smaller and more irregularly shaped than the perfect square Herodotus described. The actual dimensions were about 1/10 of what he claimed, 100 bronze gates, not found in the street grid. The layout was much more organic, typical of ancient cities. It became clear that there was a major disconnect between the text and the ground. So, what happened? Was Herodotus a liar? Not necessarily. To understand the discrepancy, we have to understand Herodotus himself and the world he lived in. He was a storyteller, an oral historian. He traveled widely, yes, but he relied heavily on what local guides, priests, and officials told him. He was a curious outsider, trying to make sense of a foreign and ancient culture. Imagine traveling to a completely alien country today and relying on translators and local storytellers. You will likely get a mix of facts, local pride, and tall tales. For example, when Herodotus was told the walls were a certain size, he might have been given a number that had symbolic meaning rather than a literal measurement. In ancient cultures, numbers often carried religious or cosmological significance. The sheer scale he described might have been a way for his informants to express the city's overwhelming power and importance, not its literal footprint. Herodotus, coming from a more literal Greek tradition, might have just written it down as fact. There's also the question of whether Herodotus ever actually went to Babylon. Some scholars argue he might have gathered his information from a distance, perhaps in a different Persian city, compiling stories from merchants and travelers who had been there. This would explain the secondhand feel of some of his descriptions and the lack of specific, verifiable details you'd expect from an eyewitness. He doesn't mention, for instance, the famous Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. That's a pretty big omission if you were actually there. The gardens are another mystery entirely, as no archaeological evidence for them has ever been found in Babylon, leading some to believe they were located elsewhere or were a purely poetic invention. One of the most bizarre and controversial stories Herodotus told about Babylon was the practice of sacred prostitution. He claimed that every Babylonian woman once in her life was required to go to the temple of Ishtar, the goddess of love, and wait until a stranger threw a silver coin into her lap. She would then have to go with that man and consummate the act outside the temple before she could return home. He described how beautiful women were chosen quickly, while less attractive ones might have to wait for years. This story became one of the most enduring myths about Babylon, cementing its reputation in the Western imagination as a place of decadence and sin. But here is the thing. There is absolutely zero corroborating evidence for this practice from any Babylonian source. No cuneiform tablets, no legal codes, no administrative texts mention anything of the sort. Modern historians now believe the story was likely a misunderstanding or a complete fabrication. It might have been a Greek projection of their own anxieties about barbarian customs, or a misinterpretation of a different religious ritual. Whatever the source, it powerfully shaped the perception of Babylon for millennia. So if Herodotus got so much wrong, why is he still so important? Because his work isn't just a record of facts, it's a record of perception. He shows us how the ancient Greeks saw the Persian Empire and its wonders. He captures the awe, the confusion, and the cultural biases of his time. His Babylon is a wonder tale, a semi-mythical place that reflects the Greek fascination with the colossal. Ancient civilizations of the East, his writings, inaccuracies and all, sparked centuries of curiosity. Without his grand descriptions, would archaeologists have been so driven to find the real Babylon? His myths fueled a desire for discovery. The quest to prove or disprove Herodotus has been a major engine of archaeological and historical research. In a way, his mistakes were just as influential as his facts. Ultimately, the story of Herodotus and Babylon is a fantastic lesson in critical thinking. It teaches us to always question our sources, to understand the context in which they were written, and to be aware of the difference between a historical account and a cultural narrative. The real Babylon, unearthed by archaeologists, was a complex, powerful, and historically significant city. It was the capital of a great empire, a center of science, astronomy, and law. It doesn't need the exaggerations of Herodotus to be amazing. The Babylon of Herodotus, however, lives on as a powerful idea, symbol of unimaginable wealth, architectural grandeur, and exotic mystery. It's a city of the mind, built from a traveler's tales and 2,000 years of imagination. Both the real city of bricks and clay and the mythical city of words and legends are part of our shared human story. And untangling the two is what makes history so endlessly fascinating. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time to explore the two Babylons, the one that was and the one we were told about. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history and myth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next adventure. Let me know in the comments what other historical mysteries you'd like us to investigate. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.